I wanted to thank everybody who was so kind this week and went out of their way to avoid talking to me and giving me advice. And I have drunk so much tea with honey and lemon and sometimes whiskey this week that I could just float back to Milwaukee at this point. So, and Toby is ready and to step in should I falter. Anyway, I can talk about it a little bit. We being credential evaluators have participated in the GDN meetings for quite a few years, I think since the beginning, and realized that sometimes we were a little bit not forgotten, but our piece in the puzzle wasn't always understood. And it makes me think a little bit of my husband who owns a translation agency. And what happens is someone has a multi-million-dollar machine that they're selling in China, and they get to customs, and customs holds up this machine because no one bothered to translate the documentation into Chinese. So then all of a sudden they're scrambling and like, we have to find a translator and so on and so forth. And then he charges them lots of money at the last minute, which credential evaluators don't do. But it's the same. Everyone understands that it needs to happen, but nobody really knows quite where they fit. So this really came from Jim Kelly from my office and I, talking with other credential evaluators. TISEP, Herman was very involved to make sure that we move forward and we spoke to what was happening in this ecosystem. So the objective was really to bring together. I was going to say I hate wordy slides, but I felt like wordy slides might be helpful in this situation. Bring together professionals with expertise in the areas of data mobility and credential evaluation. So we're talking to each other, and we really wanted to have something come out of this besides us talking. We felt going in that we're envisioning something that would look like a roadmap. And that was sort of, there were different pieces. There was the car, there was the road, there were passengers. Jim gets credit for that analogy. And so that in order to move forward and to know where we were going, we all had to work together. So the organizers were TISEP, GDN, ECE, my organization, and the planning committee included Liz, who you met this week, Toby, Herman, Jessica Stannard from Nuffic, and me. And I just was thinking that one of the things I think that is not maybe unique, but important to remember about credential evaluation is that we both consume data and we produce data. So we're not an institution talking peer to peer. We are a peer in a lot of ways, but we get the data and we have to consume it, we manipulate it, and then we produce a new set of data that can, or maybe should, which is one of the questions, travel along with the student throughout their lives, along with their documents and their certificates and their experiences, their credential evaluation. So this was the process. We first solicited white papers. So we sent out a message to TISEP, and Herman and Victoriano sent out to the GDN that this was going to happen. And we asked for white papers on topics that sort of bubbled up that related to what we expected to be working on. One of the things was that we really felt that going into this, we didn't want to have any preconceived notions of where it was going. We wanted to let it happen in the 2 days that we were together. So we got about 10 white papers. And topics included verification and privacy issues in South Africa from someone at SACWA. There were several papers that addressed what languages should be included in the student records. What languages should they be presented in? A lot of papers on a list of standards, and when we're talking about standards in this context, it's content standards, having to do with security, verification, data quality, informed consent, format, naming conventions, date of birth conventions, things like that. We also talked about guidelines, the format of the electronic data, and whether the credential evaluation should be included. One of the papers gave a very good overview of several online databases that are currently in place: Sweden, Ukraine, the US, and West Africa. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but in West Africa, there's a process in place for confirming the secondary level credentials. And these were examples from well-to-do countries and also countries that do not have a lot of resources. And several people pointed out, we need resources to move forward with this, but there are also ways to move forward with more limited resources. Emerging qualification systems within the Asia-Pacific region as they relate to credential evaluation. There's a paper on the Article 26 backpack, which you heard about from Adrian yesterday. And then finally, a proposed international educational network, and a lot of information about how that would come to be and how it would look. So from these papers, we distilled 4 working groups sort of to focus on these 4 topics. And I really wanted to take a moment here to thank very much the organizations who sent participants to this symposium from all over the world. And it was really an important investment that they made in making this happen. And I'll recognize people in a little bit. So let me see, before I forget. So the working groups: authenticity, verification, recognition. This was, a clear, this had a lot to do with the work we've done in our task force on verification. This is very near and dear to the hearts of credential evaluators. Data elements, including language and shared technology. Communication protocols, data standards having to do with security, privacy, transparency. And then finally, integration, communication of different models, and creating a global network. So initially when we got together, we asked the facilitators of the working groups to pose a question of what going into this, what do you see, what the potential benefits might be from this? And then what do you see potential threats or challenges that might come out of this? And then think about some questions that are specific to what your working group is going to focus on. So we had in the room participants from a number of countries. It turned out five continents. This is a little bit of an earlier version of the PowerPoint, so I had a couple other things, but nonetheless, I'll have them in the notes. So I just wanted to, and I also thought that I believe Herman said there was about 120, 130 people finally at the GDN. And to have nearly 30 participants in the TICEP symposium really speaks to how important you all feel that credential evaluation is. So I would just ask the participants to just briefly stand up. I won't name you all because I can't pronounce all of your names. So if you could all stand up, please, just for a second. And I'd like to especially recognize, let's see who's here, Becca, Ken, Jim Kelly, and Emily, who served as group facilitators. They did a lot of work getting ready for that, so thank you. And we also made an effort with the working groups to, as much as possible, not have all the credential evaluators in one group, not have everyone from one organization. Chesik sent several representatives and spread out in different groups to make sure there was a lot of, sort of not everyone was in a group having the same opinion, because we felt that it was pretty important to have some disagreement. That was how we would determine, what was really important. If we all walked into the room agreeing with each other, what was the point, right? And so when we get to the end, there were some things that some people felt really passionately should have been included, that were not. And there were some things that were included that some people were like, I don't know about that, but it was really a group project. And so what we did was work through a lot of this stuff. And we also felt, again, this is a theme from the conference and as a whole, that the people in the room were representing the people who weren't in the room, that we had to keep in mind that there are a lot of people who are not here, but are also credential evaluators, particularly from underserved countries, underrepresented countries, and that we should keep them in mind as we were working through this. So I was really glad to have people who were, have done a lot of work in the refugee area, people from China, people from the States, and all over that have different perspectives. For themes, it was really interesting that we didn't switch up the groups at all. The groups really stayed together during the first day. And then at the end of the first day, we had a quick summary from the facilitators about, sort of what rose to the top. And there was really a lot of overlap from one group to another. I mean, there were things that were specific to a particular group, but there were certain themes that kept coming up. And I have to say, probably the one that came up the most is the one that I get asked the most about: authenticity of source. How do you tell? I mean, it's one thing when it's CHESIC, one thing when it's an institution, when it's parchment, when it's digital. But when something, we had an example, there's an example of an organization in Nigeria who, contacts us regularly and says, you have to have your applicants send the documents through us. And we would post something on a message board and say, does anybody else, everyone else was hearing the same thing from them. But finally the Nigerian government said, no, they have no real standing. And so this is what we were talking about. How do we get to a point of finding best practices and so on to vet these sources? Data elements, of course, were a major theme, and we knew going in that was something we wanted to talk about, and in general, a shared terminology. Records management was also important. How long are the records available? Should they be available indefinitely? Should they have a sort of expiration date? Often in credential evaluation, we want to have an expiration date because our information changes, our resource changes, our equivalencies change. So we would never say, for example, when I graduated from Beloit College, that transcript is what it is and will be what it is until I die. But a credential evaluation is not that way. You get new information, you come up with different equivalencies. So we have a 10-year expiration on our evaluations. So we talked a lot about how much, that sort of archiving and retention. Shared terminology. So records management, retention issues, building networks was very important, and how we would go about building networks. We also talked about a need for a broader input from a broader group of countries, especially those who are underrepresented. And also, we wanted to make sure that the GDN as a whole recognized credential evaluation as an important stakeholder. So those were the themes that emerged. I was really hoping not to have to read this slide, but here we go. So recommendations. So what happened on the second day in the morning, each of the facilitators presented fairly in-depth what their various groups had talked about, and then the other participants were asked questions and clarify. And during that time, which we have to say we could have used another half a day, we talked about what we wanted to come out of this as recommendations, because we felt that's why we're here. We're not here to say, okay, this is kind of what we think, and how we would get the recommendations out there. So first recommendation, shared lexicon. or commitment to having an accessible lexicon. And it was Ken, I think, who articulated this really well, that we're not saying everyone needs to use the same vocabulary, but we're saying everyone has to have a vocabulary that they share and that is accessible so people can understand what they're talking about. We would recommend that the student record be issued in the original language and with an English translation. It's really important. Anyone who's a credential evaluator knows that we always have to see a document or information in the original language, because once it's translated, it takes on a different meaning. If you say bachelier in French and it's translated to bachelor's degree, well, it's a completely different thing. In France, it's a secondary school document. In the States, it's a post-secondary document or credential. We recommend that credential evaluation is seen as a stakeholder group. Whoops, what's going on? Seen as a stakeholder group in GDN, and we request that GDN advocate, champion, and promote the benefits of this group of stakeholders. We heard a lot of talk, like, for instance, the fascinating information about some of the Pacific region and qualification frameworks, but nobody talks about where credential evaluation fits in that conversation. And when we talk about some things like MREX and EWP, where one institution talks to another institution, well, what if you need a credential evaluation in that conversation? So we wanted to make sure that the GDN was promoting our role in student mobility. In the digitized record, we recommend that institutional and programmatic recognition information is included. This was a really important topic when we were meeting last year with the AQVN, because they felt that was really important, so that information doesn't include just the student's achievement and so on, but includes other things we need to know about the system and about the recognition of a particular institution or the program that the student has completed. Okay, whoops. We also recommended, and Matt talked about this a little bit last evening, that the purpose that the data is and the information is for which the information will be used is important and can impact the content that is included in a particular message, if you will, or particular way of presenting that data. And there was some discussion amongst credential evaluators, because we tend to want to see how it looks regardless of what the purpose is, but certain things can be highlighted, certain things can be included. So if you're applying for a job, doesn't matter if you failed a course and retook it if you got your diploma. But if you're applying to go to graduate school, that might matter. So we recommended that this be included. We recommend that there's a creation of a global directory that includes institutions and other stakeholders. So we have sort of two issues. We want to have a global directory of institutions as far as higher education institutions, but we also want a directory of everyone involved in this sort of like credential evaluation agencies, CHESIC, even diploma mills, everyone that's involved in digital student data. And we recognize that there's a lot of work to be done on that, and we'll need work. We'll need a lot of input from GDN members, GDN signatories. Last one, and it's kind of a recommendation, but it's more an affirmation, and that is trusted sources are fundamental to what we do, and we need to develop best practices and define and determine best practices and share them. And we can never, we would never want to dictate to someone how they determine what a trusted source is, but we also feel that as a community, we should develop best practices so that people can use that as a tool. And we envision TISEP being very involved in this project. So having TISEP sort of not vet organizations, because there was a lot of discussion as to whether there's an organization that should be vetting providers, but that is a road that is fraught with danger. And so we felt that at least as a first step, that we would give people the tools so that they could do their own vetting, make their own decisions about how trusted a source might be. So we envision TISEP really taking a lead on that. All right. Okay. So is there anything else to talk about? Okay. And also, I just would emphasize at that point that this is the group recommendation, that this was that was really important, that this was our voice together. Clearly not mine. So next steps, and as I tend to do, it's easy to say we're going to explore this. Well, what does explore mean? So, before I talk about the next steps, I would say really further define these and put dates to them, put deadlines to them, to make sure that they happen, that we move forward on this, because this is really not ending here. This is for TISEP members to move forward, for GDN members to move forward with, and we'll also make changes, and we'll solicit input from other people that may affect how we move forward. So we need to explore more defining terminology, and as I think it was Natalie said, yes, we're not looking for homogeneity. We're looking for definitions, so that everyone is talking about the same thing. Explore ways to determine trusted sources, as I mentioned. Explore the possibility of including the evaluation report as part of a student data package. So stick that in one of the pockets of the backpack, if you will. This was, as sort of an aside, one of the, credential evaluators will continue to issue copies of evaluation reports. That's a revenue stream for us typically. So if it becomes a part of a data package, that's taken away. And so there's some, mixed feelings about this, but I think, so we need to explore that more. But I think I got the feeling that in general, people felt that this, as we move forward with the idea of a data box or a backpack, that credential evaluation is one of the pieces that goes into that. And we'll need to further explore issues surrounding document retention, data ownership, and minimum standards for transparency. And basically, further explore the role of TISEP, get more information from TISEP members. I'm hoping to publish the papers, also publish sort of our outcomes, or get a paper from our outcomes so that we can share that. We do have TISEP conference coming up in Rome in September, and this will be an important part of the work that we do there. And so we'll need to explore this. All just sort of happened a few days ago, so we haven't really synthesized everything and decided exactly how we'll move forward. But this is, I guess, I feel pretty happy about what we've achieved, and felt good that we got as much done as we did in the not quite 2 days that we had to do it. So thank you. I could feel the tension in the room when I walked up to the microphone to see if my voice was going to come out, and it looks like I almost made it. So thank you.